I'm very, very excited to be sitting here today with my co-host. Her name is Kathy Eldon, and we're going to be talking about everything Kathy. She is a networker and a connector, and she is a medium of sorts with the work that you're doing. You have a brand new book, and we're going to be talking about your book. We're going to be talking about your life. We're going to be talking about your foundation. But everything we're going to be talking about is to be tools for people that are watching to how you can help them evolve and where they're at.
I'm so happy to be able to do that
Thank you
today
for being
with
here.
you. That's
Thank
just
you.
fantastic.
In excitement of Kathy being here, we have some members of our office who are actually sitting in and participating in the interview. So I'm excited to have them here as well. So let's look at this book for a second. You wrote a memoir about some of your experiences in the heart of life. Tell me about the title.
There's a wonderful quote, and it's Khalil Gibran, who was a Lebanese mystic, poet, extraordinary being. And I found that quote in his poem on death. And I realized after trying 400 titles for this book, it was the right title, because my life has been trying to understand the secrets of death. But in the end, I found out that you can only find them in living fully.
In this book, you talk about the loss of your son. You talk about what that pivotal moment was for you. And I always feel that there's no greater loss than the loss of a child, and that it's membership to a club that nobody ever wants to have or own. And it's not something that you ever move past, get over, but people manage to move through that. And they say that they look for closure, but I actually think that they're looking for connection.
And for me, it was about transforming the ultimate loss of a child. And how do you make sense of it? You may not find meaning, but you can create meaning. And I think my life has been very much trying to help myself initially create meaning around the loss of a beloved son. And now what I do in life is help other people create meaning in their lives.
Tell us what happened with Dan.
When I was 30, my husband and I and our 7-year-old son Dan and 3-year-old daughter Amy moved to Nairobi, Kenya, which was just a magical place. I became a journalist and a writer. And my son Dan and Amy followed me on these adventures that I would get to go on, meeting extraordinary people. And Dan became hooked on journalism, and he became a photojournalist in Somalia. He was the first person to really break the story of a terrible famine in Somalia. His work was featured, and it triggered a global response and brought aid into Somalia. Tragically, on July 12, 1993, there was a bombing by UN forces of a house where they believed a sort of Osama bin Laden type of person was hiding. The guy wasn't there. The bombing killed 70 people, wounded another 200. The survivors ran to the journalist's hotel to beg the journalist to come and tell the story, shoot the carnage. Dan and his friends traveled over under guard to this place, but when they arrived, the survivors were so enraged and they became a mob, and they attacked the journalists who were just there to help. 4 of them were beaten, stoned, shot to death. And Dan was 22 years old. And so he died while trying to tell a story that the world really needed to hear. The most extraordinary thing that happened immediately after Dan's death was a friend of mine from Kenya. She called me right after Dan was killed, and she said, I've just had this incredible experience. I went to this psychic. My love life is terrible, and I just wanted some guidance. And when she arrived, this woman had said, you're worried about your friends, the ones who just passed, and especially the charismatic one with the elephant face. He was the youngest, he was the hippie of the group. And she described the fact that there were 4 people together and that they had died. And I was just incredulous, and I was in such great pain. And she said, you really might want to go visit this woman. And again, being my skeptical journalist self, I decided, okay, I'll do it, and I booked under a false name. So I didn't want to think that if I booked under my own name, maybe she would have read it, because, you want to lessen the possibility of research.
Listen, my audience knows, protect the integrity of the experience at all costs.
Exactly, yeah, for sure. So I went, and she was a very sort of no-nonsense, like, governess. And I arrived there, and she put me on the sofa, and she started describing the way that Dan had gone, and he didn't really suffer particularly at all. And she was the first person to, as it were, channel this spirit that I wanted to believe was alive, but I didn't really know whether it was appropriate to believe because it was all so new. But she said, you have a huge job to do. And then she said, you're going to write a book. And it was like the last thing on my mind. And I said, why does he want me to do all this stuff? This is outrageous, really. I was very indignant because I was so broken and so lost. And she said, most people have to live through their children, but I have to live through you. And that was a big responsibility. And I said, well, how can I do it? And she said, don't worry, he'll be close by. But, again, I didn't really believe it.
But you embraced it.
Yeah, I sort of embraced it. I'd say it took me a long time to truly embrace it, because the idea of that is so huge that it shifts your whole perception of reality. And are they watching you in the bathroom? Are they watching you, how are they watching you? I don't know. I don't know what you think about that.
I always tell people, because people ask that question, they're not interested in matters of the physical world. That would be bedroom and bathroom issues. They're more concerned about matters of the physical world when it comes to our health. But, what I resonated with is that you call something team spirit. I have an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I teach them that we all have spirit guides and that they are there to help us. And they ask, the questions like, who are they? And I don't really get into the who are they's, because I just want them to grasp the concept. So I say, well, the way that you go to school and you have your teachers, in the spirit world, you have teachers as well. And they're your guides. I go, but what I like to call them is your team. Mm-hmm. So you have a team. You actually call it team spirit.
I didn't call it team spirit. Brenda Lawrence, who is an extraordinary British medium, in the second time that I visited a medium, I went to Brenda, booked under a false name, and Brenda said, she said, there's this young man jumping up and down saying, Mum, I guess it must be your son. I burst into tears, and she said, I'll just let him settle down for a minute. And then in bounded this other spirit, who turned out to be my father-in-law, described with pure accuracy. And I was like, okay, thanks, but maybe just move sideways.
Where's my boy? Get my son back.
Bye, Bruno. And Dan came back, and he says his team spirit will be helping you. And I love the concept, because I know that it's not just this one.
It's not just one.
No. And I think different entities maybe come in at different periods of your life.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think we have a master guide from the day we're born to the day that we pass. And then we have different guides that come in and come out. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to go to a question from one of the Evolve members.
My question's about my children. Both my baby and my 5-year-old son have had experiences communicating with spirit. How do I know if the energy they're connecting with is positive or negative? And how can I both encourage their openness to the spirit world and still keep them protected at this very young age?
Kids are extremely intuitive from a very, very young age. They're able to see and hear and feel energy and spirit. And one of the things I like people to do as parents is to make sure that they don't train their kids to be psychic, but they train them to be aware. I think having a strong foundation in faith is important. And then making sure that they're not fearful about their experience is probably the most important thing for me. I hope that helps. Let's talk about your daughter, Amy. Has Amy ever had an experience where she felt she made a connection with her brother?
I think she goes through life having lots and lots of conversations with Dan. I think she is probably more reserved, and it's a little more difficult for her. So I think her experiences has been passed to her through someone else, rather more than her actual saying that I've had this experience.
Can I ask you a parental question? One of the things that I have found over the 3 decades of doing this is that when a child passes and there are other children left in the family, how would you recommend to a parent out there who's maybe new at having to parent the children left behind?
Beautiful.
What could you say to them to help them evolve through that so that those children aren't living in the shadow of the child that's passed?
I think that's a brilliant question. There's even the question of when a child is ill for a long time before she passes, and the other child or children have to deal with that, and then they have to deal with the grief of the parent. Or in our situation where Dan became almost a very public figure, and Amy was in danger of being dwarfed by that magnitude of the light around Dan. And I think it's very important to find ways to focus on that other child. I mean, the other child is in spirit and is absolutely fine, doing great. We have to find the strength in ourselves to be alive for that child who remains. And I must confess, the only reason that I stuck around, to be honest, is because Amy was alive and I needed to be well for her. So maybe in focusing on that remaining children, it gives us the reason to be alive and to give us the hope and spirit that things, one day you will be laughing again.
So for somebody who just went through a loss,
Yeah.
or the loss of a child, who maybe just found what we're doing right now, they came across us, and we don't know where we're finding them on their journey, what would you say to them?
I would say, talk to that child who's passed. Know that that being is around you and loving you and wanting more than anything for you to be joyous again. And to be able to be a good parent to the child who has remained or the children who have remained, and a good wife or spouse or husband or love or grandparent. I just think it's to live fully in this life, in the heart of life. That is the greatest gift we can give to those around us. And it's hard. It's not going to happen overnight. It really, really won't. That's folly to think that can happen. But you will one day find joy.
I have a thing that I talk about specifically at this time of the year. You know, November, December, we're coming up on the holidays.
so painful.
It's one of the most hardest and difficult periods of time that I think people endure. Every Christmas day, evening, we're all here at 9 o'clock live because we want to give people a place to come.
Right.
Just to kind of say, look, you're not forgotten about. We're all here. We celebrate with our families, but you know, we're here doing this. And I think a lot of people forget how difficult the holidays are. So I always try to start now and say, if you know somebody who's dealing with the second year of loss, remember them, because that first year is your coasting year. You go through all the birthdays and the anniversaries in a certain kind of, it's almost like you just magnetically get pulled or kind of like ushered through. And then that second year comes in, and you have lost the support of the people in the physical world because now it's the second year, so they think you're much better now. And the reality is you're left here to feel all these things.
Yeah.
So what about somebody that's there? What would you say? Ask for help, or?
Absolutely. What's weird too, I remember Amy and I would go to those Christmas lunches and nobody would mention Dan. You think, what? You know, this guy, let's talk about him. And people feel very uncomfortable sometimes. They don't know that it's okay to talk about them. We found the second year so much more difficult than the first year, and the first year was hell. We did a book called Angel Catcher, a journal of loss and remembrance, which is a guided journal out of our own pain. And I remember Amy, like in November, called me and she said, I don't want to go on, it's too painful. And I looked around the room to try to find something to console her, and I had a dream catcher over my bed. And I said, I know, you can make an angel catcher. And she said, what's an angel catcher? And I said, it's a book where you can capture the memories about Dan and what he used to say and pictures. So she came back at Christmas time with this book, which was her angel catcher, because I think, as you say, nobody is aware of the fact that year after year after year, it's not like it goes away the second year.
Right.
It's still painful, and it's been 20 years. But there is still an ache in my heart.
Did you join any grief groups, or did you do anything that would be therapeutic?
There was nothing like that in those days. I think it's exciting that there's so much now.
Oh, this is a renaissance of information when it comes to spirituality and metaphysics in a very, very big way. You have a really amazing project.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Creative Visions.
Well, just the origin of it. I woke up in the morning at a time when I had nothing. I'd left everything in my life in Africa. I had absolutely nothing, and I awakened with a vivid dream. And it was really like a vision. And it said, you have to start an organization called Creative Visions to help people achieve their potential, both for themselves and the planet. And I was supposed to use the power of media. No idea how I could do it. I was actually given the logo as well, which is the first hexagram of the I Ching. And the I Ching is an ancient Chinese divination technique. And the first hexagram is the creative. It's the vital force. It's the power. It's the sort of the God force of creativity. And it was like, are you kidding? I have nothing. There's no way I can do any of this. And somehow I have been enabled over the years to be able to fulfill that dream, that vision. And Creative Visions now exists as a production company that's has produced a number of films, and we're doing one on the end of life care right now. And it's going to be all about how we can make the end of our lives the best possible time.
And you have a movie that's...
And we have a movie about Dan that's just being announced. It's going to star a lovely English actor who is just, I think, a perfect choice. And it's going to be about life, but there's a strand of it that is going to indicate that life is continued.
I love what you're doing. I love what you stand for. And there's something else that you're doing. Memorials. living memorials.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Check out Sanctuary. It's a new Facebook application that you can just join from your own Facebook, which helps you celebrate, commemorate, and transform a person that you've loved. But you can also transform that horror or tragedy or sadness about death into something really positive, an action, a donation. Check out our Creative Visions Foundation website, and you can learn how to turn ideas into action and put the energy that you would have put into that person who's no longer with you and create something absolutely magical. We all have loss in our lives, and it's creating that space to celebrate that person who's no longer with us. So just go on, sign in, use your Facebook account, and sign on.
And tell me on Twitter how people find you on Twitter.
At Kathy Eldon.
Kathy, I want to thank you for being my co-host and being
Fantastic.
here. The book is called In the Heart of Life. We have 5 copies that we're going to be giving away signed to our Evolve members. Guys, thank you for being here, and always remember to be in the heart of your life by communicating, appreciating, validating, and evolving.